Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Eric Stevens was part of the prosecuting team in Judge O'Brien's courtroom Monday, January 14, 1980. First, Jack stood up in front, conducting the prosecution, and he talked to the people involved in the next case. Then he went up and dealt with the next case while his partner went back into the space for those watching. A judge of a major felony trial would never let people hold conversations back there, but traffic court went faster and was less formal. Anyway, Judge O'Brien called it quits not long after 3 o'clock. Eric went back to the office. He stopped by Miss Murphy's office. She was still on trial, but the officer there would call him when she got in. In the minutes between when he got the call and when he got there, Murphy had begun a conference with somebody else, but he waited. Remember the Clara Wharton assault at Circle, which you decided wouldn't get a true bill? He asked when she had her office cleared. He shut the door behind him. Yeah, is there more? Well, since that's not going to public trial, information that came from it is a legal confidence. I suppose. Normally, confidential information in the office is only confidential in terms of not going out of the office. It would be unforgivable if the co-workers of a complaining witness's husband heard details that had never been presented in court. Do you have something you want to say? Or are you just here because nobody else will listen to your platitudes? I have serious crimes to prosecute. Reminding him that she didn't consider the traffic offenses he prosecuted as serious. Well, it's like this. I'm going to marry Clara, and it would embarrass me if the details she told you got around the office. I'm sure that you'd find it more important that it would embarrass her, a victim who came forward to be a complaining witness. And why didn't I hear about this earlier? Well, I met her maybe 2 days before you did. The proposal, much less the acceptance, wasn't until long after you had decided to null pros. Anyway, can you keep it in your section? Sure. I'll get the files and put them in my private drawer. Congratulations, I think. Thanks. By the time he got back to his office and into his outer clothes, it was past 5 o'clock. When he got downstairs, Clara was waiting. She was watching the other elevators, and he walked up behind her before speaking. Clara. He took her hand. When she turned, he took her other hand. He wanted to kiss her, but she didn't look receptive. You in the mood for walking? The car is halfway to Carson's, and parking down there is a pain in the butt. Sure. He led her through the underground maze. In this weather, there were probably more people down there than on the sidewalks above. The tunnels didn't go as far south as Carson's, though, and they finally had to go back up to street level. I didn't know those were down there, she said. Of course. There are Chicagoans, and then there are loop dwellers. Every neighborhood has its secrets, even the neighborhood everybody else visits. I don't think anybody designed that system. The individual buildings each do what they find convenient. They, and those around them, hurried through the slush. He stopped her when they were a little inside Carson's, far enough in to get warm and out of the way of entering and leaving crowds. Look, there is a general decision before we get to the specific decision. When we move to a new, larger place, are you going to want to redo the bedroom? Or are you content with what I have now? That was going to be her home, and, really, decor was more of a woman's thing. Especially if she was going to be a stay-at-home homemaker. She was going to want to be in charge of how the place looked. That would be fine, but he didn't want to buy loads more furniture and then have her redo everything. More, of course, as well as a larger bed, but starting from what I have now. He didn't get a reply. He didn't seem to have made himself clear. The reason I'm asking is that we either get something which will go with what I've got, or you start your decorating now. You buy a bed which will be the first piece of the new decor. He fumbled out the pictures he'd taken. In case you don't remember, I brought some Polaroids to show you what the room looks like now. He was leading the witness. That's fine. Let's get something to go along with these. Which might mean that she liked the look now. It didn't mean that she wouldn't have new ideas later. That was fine. He was springing it on her too fast. Mom had taken 2 years for the planning the last time she had redecorated. She kept the pictures, though, and consulted them when they were looking at beds. She picked something which would fit. Look, can you sleep on a firm mattress? He'd had sex on an extra soft one, and it had taken something away from the experience. They ordered the bed and the mattress set. Those would be delivered in a week. Well, he could arrange for somebody to be there if Clara couldn't, but he'd ask later. He had a Carson's charge. They left and walked together to his car. Should they eat in the loop? Clara looked gorgeous, as she always did. She was not dressed, however, for a fancy loop restaurant, and she had already raised that issue. Well, she had enjoyed the faux place, and it wasn't much out of their way. The Argyle exit from the outer drive was only a couple north of the Belmont exit. When they were waiting at the light to get on the drive, he decided to suggest it. I thought we'd go back to the faux place. A long silence. Ascent, descent on clarity? The Vietnamese soup place. That sounds fine. Have you really run out of restaurants? That was better. Well, not in Evanston, and we really haven't done the loop yet. There are two loop eating experiences, lunch and dinner, though both kinds of places are mostly open for both meals. Should he have suggested a loop McDonald's? She was a college student, probably used to eating supper at McDonald's. In the rest of Chicago, I only know a few, and most of those aren't on our way. Chinatown, for instance. But this place makes for a reasonably short detour from the direct way to your home. Besides, I thought you liked it. You finished your bowl of soup. He could never figure out whether she didn't eat much because she didn't like his selection, because she was trying to lose weight, because she was trying to act ladylike, or why. If she didn't like his selection, she should say so. Well, they would be married soon, and he could ask her where she wanted to eat. I did like it. It was fine. Now, she sounded as if she wanted it. The other thing is that they are going to deliver the bed in a week. Do you think you could be there? Don't lift anything, but see if they'll set the bed up. If they won't, I will. She was pregnant. Damn it. Pregnant women shouldn't strain themselves. Sure. She didn't sound sure. Okay. Stupidly, I didn't have keys made. There were so many things to remember. I'll give them to you Wednesday. By the way, do you have a driver's license? Hell, she might have her own car. No, she had come to church, to Cassandra's too, by bus. It was nothing like a direct route. Sure. This time her usual unemphatic affirmative made sense. Of course a 19-year-old girl would have a license. How is that, by the way? Well, it was only two things he should do that he was putting together. The family house and the family car were two very different parts of her life. I'll have another set of car keys made at the same time. Your moving into my apartment is the only practical way we can do this, but I'm bound to treat it as if I'm the only one there. He was a creature of habit, and so many of his habits were going to be inappropriate. That's not selfishness, it's stupidity. Tell me when I'm doing that, okay? Sure. Well, he'd asked. Again, she finished her bowl of pho. He wondered if there were any Vietnamese restaurants in Evanston. Well, if there weren't, this wasn't all that far to drive. Parking in her neighborhood, never good, looked impossible that night. He stopped the car in the street in front of her door. They had a kiss, but he stayed in the car while she got out. When he got home that night, he called his family. You got my letter? Yeah, Mom answered. When are you going to send a photo? We don't know what your fiancée looks like. Well, she's beautiful. You'll see soon enough. The wedding is February 2nd. That's a Saturday. Do you think you and Dad can come? You couldn't keep us away. And Rachel? Honestly, Eric, you should ask her yourself. But you'd have car room for her and Stan? Sure. We always have car room for Stan. I'm not sure he'd enjoy the trip, though. It's one hell of a long ride for a 12-year-old. And weddings don't mean much at that age. Too true. Well, do you think you're going to provide us with another grandkid to spoil? So much for keeping Clara's secret. Well, if Mom got a baby to cuddle, she would forgive the lie. What will be, will be. You aren't going to get another grandkid in Moline, though, not from me. Well, Rachel isn't telling us about any prospects, but you didn't tell us anything either. Sorry about that. Aren't you moving a little fast? Well, that's a change. You used to complain that I was moving too slowly. I'll admit that it's a short engagement, but I never saw the use of engagements, really. Either you're going to get married or you're not. Yeah, but you don't have to plan the wedding. It's going to be very simple. And your bride is happy with that? Her idea. Rachel was happy for him. Well, little brother, it's about time. I took my time, but I got a winner. You should see her. Oh, I plan to. But don't grind it in. Rachel hadn't taken her time. She'd married while still in college. And Tom had been a loser. I didn't mean anything like that. I was comparing it to the girls I dated previously. You knew some of them. Anyway, you and Stan are invited. Yeah, I'll make it. Stan, I don't know. It's a long drive, and I'm not sure I want to explain why Uncle Eric doesn't have enough time for him. There's that. Wednesday had the worst weather of the month. He was doubtful about making it from Clara's house to Evanston in 45 minutes. On a good day, it wouldn't take more than 20. He called her to see if they could start earlier. Look, can I pick you up earlier? I want to be sure about getting to the church before 6:45. Sure. Expect me about 5:45, but I'm not guaranteeing that, either. Dress for sloshing through snow, but don't get your coat and stuff on until I get there. Court closed late, though. Rather than go back to the office, he went directly to his car. Driving was slow, but he got to her door in plenty of time. He stopped in the street in front of her door and ran up to ring her bell. She answered it, dressed, as he had suggested, for inside. I'm going back to the car. If anyone comes along, I'll drive around the block. If I'm not there, don't come out until you see me. Sure. And when he got back, she was coming out of her door. The guy behind him was patient while she got in, but he started before she got her seatbelt fastened. At the speeds they were going, not even a front-end collision would be dangerous. He got to the church nearly on time. Reverend Lawrence must have seen them from some window in better heat, because he opened the door a minute after they arrived. He sent Clara in and went to park the car. He was wearing rubbers over his shoes, and the snow was deep enough on some of the unshoveled sidewalk to get to his socks. When he got there, Reverend Lawrence opened the door for him and led him back to his office. It seemed up to him to get the discussion going. Well, the two of us want to get married. I thought that might be it. Clara was sporting an engagement ring. Let me get some objective data first. Clara had been born September 15th, 1960. Neither of them had been married before, etc., etc., etc. How much of this was necessary, as opposed to how much was to get them used to answering the questions, Eric didn't know. He'd started interviews like that, too. Well, how long have you known each other? Since early November, Clara said. Good. She was going to carry her share of the conversation. That was a Wednesday, too, he pointed out. It must be precisely 10 weeks. Don't you think you're being a bit precipitous? Well, yes, but they had their reasons. It was Clara's choice, though, whether they'd tell their reasons. And how did you meet? Ouch. That was getting too close. We were both guests of Cassandra, he said. He'd been Cassandra's guest, or Cassandra and Bill's guest, loads of times. Clara was Cassandra's student, and he had no idea how many students she had entertained. He doubted whether the preacher had any idea, either. Clara, instead of letting him carry the ball, started asking about confidentiality. There, they were on absolutely safe grounds. The state and the county had a fairly Catholic government making the rules, and a good many Catholic judges administering them. Sanctity of the confessional was ingrained in those guys. Lawrence reassured her, and said that if there were anything that he wouldn't know was secret that they should warn him. Well, their secret wasn't anything he'd have doubts about. Okay, this is what happened, Clara said. I was assaulted. I went to Professor Palmer. She said I should report it. Finally, she said that she knew a prosecutor I could report it to. I and that prosecutor, Eric, met in her house. After the twins were asleep and Mr. Palmer had gone to a meeting, I told him the story. He got me to tell it to a woman who heads assault prosecutions at his office. They decided that they couldn't prosecute. Meanwhile, I discovered that I was pregnant. It had to be from the assault. I told Eric. I had a nice, year-long plan for courting her, he said. When I heard that she was pregnant, I saw that this year-long courtship wasn't what she needed. I proposed immediately. She took a while, but she accepted. By the way, in terms of confidences you might not know are confidences, he continued, that we've only known each other for 10 weeks is one. This is going to be my child. That it was conceived before we got married will be plain to everybody. That it was conceived before we even met is something I want known to as few people as possible. Certainly. Might I ask, are you planning to have this wedding simply to give the baby your name and then end it? Hell no. He wanted the marriage. The name was only something he could offer her. No. The timing is because of the baby. The marriage will be until death do us part. Until death do us part, Clara said when Reverend Lawrence turned towards her. That was great to hear. That seemed to be the last real question Reverend Lawrence had that might be a roadblock. The rest of the questions were more premarital counseling. They needed that, Eric supposed. At least, these were questions they hadn't asked each other. They didn't have to share the answers with Lawrence later, though. They just had to deal with each other on that. He had always expected to hold the reception in the parlors, and Clara agreed to that. If it was her support group, they should be there. He was strongly in favor of it because these were people who saw Clara almost exclusively in relation to him. He told Lawrence that he would cover anything that Clara's parents didn't. It was quite unlikely that they would balk, but they hadn't seemed all that happy. One last thing, and I'll let you go, Lawrence said. Well, there was something he'd like to raise, too. We've changed the wording, changed it long ago. It's not, till death us do part. It's now, as long as we both shall live. Don't worry about it. The words are my responsibility, and you both are clear what they mean, which is the important thing. He might as well raise this now. Another question entirely. As long as we have you here and you know the background, Clara hasn't been taking communion. Yes, I've noticed that. We have an open communion. I try to say that. You don't have to belong here. You don't have to belong anywhere. As long as you have been baptized and believe in Christ, you are welcome at our table, really at his table. I just feel so dirty, Clara said. Because of the assault? Yes. Well, that isn't a theologically valid reason. My usual line is that communion is a medicine for sin. It isn't a feast for the sinless. That doesn't really apply to your case, because what makes you hesitate isn't your own sin. It's more what Jesus said. It isn't what goes into a man, or, I might add, a woman, but what comes out of a man which makes him unclean. Anyway, you are welcome whenever we have communion. You are not required. And, now, he asked when they were out of the church and driving away, where do we eat? Have any old favorites? Any new suggestions? He was still bothered by the idea that she was eating lightly because she didn't like his choices of restaurant. Well, why don't we get takeout and eat at your place again? We have things to settle. That sounded good except I didn't clean up. Considering that I'll be cleaning up after you in less than a month, I don't think that will be too much of a shock. She was right. He wasn't that bad a slob. Try again. Pizza? Pizza sounds good. So maybe his selections hadn't been to her taste. They got a pizza. He was careful to ask her choice of toppings, and took it back to the apartment. They had a kiss as soon as they were out of their coats, and then he began to set up. Where do we begin? He asked. I begin before you do, she answered. Do you have that directory? I need to call Joan and Claire. He got her the directory. She went into the living room to call, and he stayed in the kitchen to get their meal ready. Claire? This is Clara. You know Eric and I are getting married. A pause. Thanks. Would you be willing to be a bridesmaid? The wedding is at your church on Saturday, February 2nd. I'm not planning to wear anything special, and the bridesmaids would wear their own clothes, too. I'm the one who's honored. You were there when I needed you, needed someone desperately. She said goodbye, hung up, and then dialed again. This call didn't sound successful, and she left her home phone for the reply. Now, he said when she returned, let's eat. Well, we promised the pastor to talk about several things, Clara began. Before we get to household chores, you should know one thing. I got my grades. I got a C in economics and another in phys ed. I got a D in English and in geology. I failed American history. That was one more thing the SOB had taken from her. I'm not going back. She sounded so defeated. Clara, that's awful, but that was because of how you felt after the assault. You can do it. I don't think I could do it next semester, fighting morning sickness. Anyway, I know that a modern marriage has equal sharing of household chores. Right now, though, I'm not going to be doing anything else. I should be able to keep house, even in a larger apartment. I take out the garbage. That was a trip down the slippery back stairs. He had almost fallen once or twice himself, and falls were much more dangerous in her condition. You're saying you do all the rest? Yeah. Well, things might change when there's a baby. Caring for an infant was damn demanding, even when it was bottle-fed. Well, I hope the baby, at least, is changed. Sometimes the Clara who probably had laughed before the assault shone through. This was one of those times. Well, that took care of housework until reality squeezed her. It certainly took care of any planning that they could do right then. If housework was where she should take the lead, budget was where he should. He, after all, had experience with the income which would be their income before long. Budget. I've been putting away $200 a month out of my take-home. We'll need some of that to pay for feeding you. We can save money on my parking downtown. I can get back and forth on the L. It stops very close to traffic court. The way I live, driving doesn't cost much. It's parking that eats you alive. You really eat most of your meals out? Well, yes, if mostly plainer and cheaper fare than he had been feeding her. Not breakfasts. More than half of those I eat here. Well, you're going to have to learn to stomach my cooking. That will increase our grocery bills, but less than you're spending in restaurants. I'm sure that anything you cook will taste delicious. He couldn't wait. Besides, that would mean that he could be sure that she liked what was on her plate. And then, he continued, there's your clothing bill. That's not all that great. You'd be surprised. He might be surprised, but so might she. In the first place, she might find that jeans made her feel out of place. In the second place, she would need maternity clothes reasonably soon. Have you thought of maternity clothes? She didn't look like she had. But they really weren't prepared to deal with this now. Look, I know this isn't quite what he said. Let's put it into 3 compartments. There's house, rent, utilities, phone. We can put car insurance in there, too. Fixed expenses that she hadn't the faintest idea about. Then there's my expenses. Then there's your expenses. Why don't we come together Sunday after church? I'll bring my pay stub, the housing costs, and my costs. You bring your costs. We'll work out a tentative budget then. And, of course, the baby will blow that to smithereens. Cassandra used to claim that the twins could outgrow their clothes on the way home from buying them. Then, there's child-raising rules. By going on, she seemed to accept his suggestion. You agree that I have an equal voice? After all, it was in her interest that he be recognized as the parent. An equal responsibility? She responded. Certainly. Then he considered exceptions. What if she, influenced by Cassandra who was an advocate, took on certain roles that made sharing responsibilities different? Obvious limitations accepted. Sure. I think, though, she continued after a moment, that Reverend Lawrence expected us to decide more than just having an equal vote, like what the rules would be. I keep picturing a very small child, but I know we'll be parents for decades. Yeah, while he imagined her expecting, his idea of the child was always as if there were 3 siblings instead of 1. Yeah, he said. I, on the other hand, keep picturing the twins when I think of kids. What do they want you to do that's not appropriate in church? That question was out of left field, but they weren't really making a hell of a lot of decisions tonight. Spin them around. That sounded inaccurate. Really, spin one of them around, and then the other. Unlike their father, I hold them tight when I'm doing it. It's really an outdoor game, but they're too used to Bill's roughhousing to respect furniture. You plan on treating your own that way? Well, that depended on what he wanted. It depended, too, on what Clara wanted. He'd asked for an equal vote. He didn't plan to ignore her. Well, our own, we can tell that they can't do that inside. She had, after all, said that she was picturing a small infant. And, of course, I didn't start with the boys when they were babies, and they won't have Bill's influence, either. But was that going to be true? Anyway, Clara could control Bill. Well, I suppose that I said that we should let Bill have some access. Really, he's good with kids. As to limits, I think, whatever I said about my having equal authority, you should be the one telling Bill the limits. I've never seen him argue with a mother, except, of course, with Cassandra. Anyway, you don't expect to be too rough with it. You're right, it sounds wrong. Too rough with him or her. Well, he wasn't ever going to be too rough with him. They just had to agree what was too rough, and with her thinking of an infant in her arms, she would push for limits that were inappropriate for a 5-year-old hellion. We'll agree, beforehand, what's too rough at any particular age. You know, not even Bill held the twins upside down when they were newborn. And, of course, it's not too rough with him or her. Either it's too rough with him, or it's too rough with her. And those might well be different questions. Anyway, the first issue is what the kid wants. Some of what he wants is wrong. Outdoor games in the house, for instance. But you don't spin around or hold upside down a kid who doesn't want you to. Now, to get more practical, what is your position on physical punishment, spanking? That was an active debate around the church. Since nobody wanted to discuss it in the presence of kids, it was discussed remarkably often in the choir. I keep thinking of a baby. Well, you don't spank a baby. That's obvious. You don't spank an infant. Think of a 3-year-old. I still remember being the one who was spanked. Which means somebody who always sees spanking as brutality. At least he always had. Yeah, me too. It's a live issue in the church. Hell, it's a live issue in the marriage of Cassandra and Bill. That's why I asked. They didn't. Until the twins came along. Their main arguments were over tax rates. I don't know. I'd rather not spank her, but I don't know what else to do. And there you had the problem. Positive reinforcement was all very well, but you could feed a rat or a pigeon only when it did what you wanted. You had to feed your kid regardless of how it behaved. Well, let's see. They really had agreement on this. Neither wanted to spank, and each suspected that he or she would. Well, the decision should be more conscious than that. Besides, the never crowd at the church would be willing to give her suggestions. Well, in the beginning, you can discipline a kid by holding it away from what it wants to do. I don't know what else to do when they get to be Paul's age. Of course, those are kids who were spanked regularly. Once you start, I don't think other punishments work. Okay, let's go with this. We don't plan to spank. When either of us feels that other punishments aren't working, we have a discussion where the kid can't hear. That's very sensible, which he would take for agreement. They were really up in the air in this discussion, talking about 2 different imaginary kids. But they'd had the discussion, it would get concrete later. I hear a lot about reading to the kid. That would have to start, if the doctrine he heard were to be obeyed, within the year. Well, don't you do that with the twins? Well, sure, they were going to read to him. The doctrine was rather stronger than that. Yeah, but there is an opinion in the church that you should read to the kid for a half hour every day from the time he can sit up to the time that he can read by himself. You read holding the book so you both can see it. Bedtime stories are additional. You say I should. Hell no. He'd said he wouldn't shirk anything that he was physically capable of doing. The last thing he would want to shirk was reading. On the other hand, she should do some of the reading. I say someone should. As you said, I enjoy reading. We'll try. And when I said there's an opinion in the church, the women have these circles. They're part of UMW. They get together mostly by the age of their children. As you could guess, they swap a great deal of advice. I only hear the edges, from Cassandra or inquire. Anyway, you'll have other sources, books, your doctor, your own mother, maybe some other acquaintances. As I said, I expect to have an equal vote, but there will be many issues where you'll get advice and I won't have heard of. He was afraid of her shutting him out, but he was equally afraid of her passivity. And when I do, I'll talk it over with you. That was what he wanted to hear. She'd take the lead, but she would talk with him. You are a dream. Is that childcare? She asked. Not really, he conceded. I think, though, that it's all the decisions on childcare either of us has enough information or opinion to make. That leaves sex. Yeah, that was something they could talk about. Maybe it was something they could do something about. Do you still think I'll frighten you? After all, they weren't married yet. He didn't have the right to have sex with her. But the first question was whether she could have sex without its frightening her. Their last sex had suggested that she could, but they could legitimately work some more on that problem. And the last time they had worked on it had been the most erotic experience of his life. And, after all, if she was willing to have sex now, she merely had to say that she needed more reassurance. Not as long as you move slowly. Well, she clearly wasn't in the mood to work on it some more. The other was a problem, though, when had he moved too fast? That's good to know both. I mean, it's good to know, very good to hear, that I don't frighten you. And it's good to be warned to move slowly. And he would move carefully when he could. As things progressed, however, he found it harder to keep control. But, right at the end, I might find it difficult. Right at the end doesn't bother me. Still, I'll try to keep it in mind. You know, I don't think we ever told him that I had been scared. Clara was changing the subject and changing it drastically. Well, we told him that you had been assaulted. It doesn't take a genius. I knew you were afraid of men the first time I met you, and I'm not all that sensitive. For that matter, the man is an experienced counselor, trained, too. They probably tell him that assault victims react badly to men in seminary. Did they really handle assault counseling in seminary? Marriage counseling, sure. Still, I got the impression that he wants every couple to settle the important questions before they get married. She might well be right. Well, what were the other concerns? He could see some coming up when life changes affected her, but at that time she would have comfort questions that her experience would address. Finally, he gave up. The floor is open. I mean, what issues do you want to bring up? Eric, I want you to take care to be thoughtful in every part of our relationship. Hadn't he? He had tried. For that matter, he would have sworn that she had been very happy before he'd asked her to say yes. I'll try. Did I fail that time? Oh no. You were wonderful. Well, that was good to hear. But I wasn't considering that the standard. In a way, it wasn't. He'd made her comfortable without expecting it to go further. What she'd asked for was to be cared for before anything else happened. Anything more? Well, I want you to be affectionate all the time. That must be an exaggeration, but it was a pleasant one to hear. Not during working hours, unfortunately. But I'm off duty now. When he got up, she got up, too. She came into his arms, and they had a long, warm hug. She cooperated enthusiastically and smiled when they separated. He remembered that she had said they didn't have a reason for more right now. After a while, he let her go. It was time to take her home. Well, this would be her home in a few weeks. He wouldn't need to stop where he had. And he could be affectionate more often, and more comfortably than in the car, too. Maybe, in this weather, we shouldn't be so public with affection. Instead, we should find time to be inside where it's more pleasant, like in their home. But that was something he'd almost forgotten, to make it her home. Oh, by the way, he went to the living room to get her keys. This one is the outside door. This is the apartment door. This is the trunk, and this is the car door and ignition. She took the key ring and dropped it in her purse. Driving her home, he remembered he had more to discuss. Start with the question to which he knew the answer. I'll see you Sunday, right? Sure. 10:30? Good question. It's messy driving. Want to make it a little earlier? 10:20? Sure. Well, she was agreeing. Do we have to wait till Sunday? You kept saying we couldn't have a date between Sundays because you needed to think things through. Well, I did. Sure she did. You did, and you thought them through. Do you still need more thinking time? I don't believe so. If she hadn't agreed, it was because he hadn't asked it right. Pick you up Friday at 6 o'clock? Or I could meet you downtown. Don't do that. You shouldn't spend time on the CTA when I can pick you up. Are we going to compare budgets? Well, he could probably handle what he needed to on Thursday night. On the other hand, if they compared budgets in his apartment, they might end up discussing other things, too. Let's just eat. Let's leave budgets till Sunday. She was silent, which he took as agreement. When he parked the car, they shared a quick kiss. Between their coats and the steering wheel, it was a little awkward. Walking her to the door, they hugged and kissed again before she went inside. Later that night, he dreamed of their wedding day, imagining the moment when they would start their life together. The feelings were intense and meaningful. On Thursday night, he wrote Millie a long letter. She had been cleaning his apartment on Friday mornings for a couple of years, though they rarely met in person. Since Clara would take over the household chores, Millie's services were no longer needed. He told her February 1st would be her last day and enclosed a check covering 7 weeks, including severance. He also mentioned Clara had a key and might stop by occasionally. When he picked Clara up for their date, she was dressed elegantly. He planned to take her somewhere special, if not quite as grand as her own charm. Manfredo's required reservations, but he had a backup plan to take her to the top restaurant at a nearby hotel where walk-ins were usually welcome. She fit perfectly in the formal setting, and the meal went smoothly. They each enjoyed a glass of wine, just enough to relax without worrying about driving. She was lively and cheerful during the ride home. At her door, she stopped him as he reached to say goodbye. Come in instead, she said. Her parents were home, and he greeted them while she went upstairs to get her coat. Her mother asked about the wedding reception plans. Are you holding it at the church? Will there be food, or do we need to find a caterer? We usually do takeout, he replied. Church meals tend to be potlucks, which doesn't really suit a wedding reception. I can't figure it out, her mother said. Want me to handle it? He offered. When I ask Bill to be my best man, I'll also ask him to pick up the food. Are you sure? Clara's voice echoed. Absolutely. I know the good spots around Evanston. Clara came back downstairs and led him to the kitchen. They shared a warm, affectionate moment. Even though her parents stayed nearby, it was nice to feel connected. On Saturday, he called Bill to ask if he would be his best man. Sure. Service at 3 o'clock? Yeah, that's when it starts. I think it'll help my nerves if you arrive a little early. Clara's not going for a fancy wedding gown, so I figured we'd do fine in suits. I'm sure. I was the only one in a suit at my wedding. Dan wore a professor's suit. I told Clara's family I'd provide the food. If I order and pay for it, can you pick it up after the service? No problem. Cake too? Oh, I forgot the cake. The bride's supposed to be nervous. Not me. I don't know what's wrong. Early onset Alzheimer's? Gee, thanks. Anytime. Well, I'll order the cake and let you know where to get it. Do you have any recommendations? Not personally. Cassandra's family didn't want anything dry, so we went downtown. He reflected on how often he should have remembered these details. Yet, despite slipping memories, he never forgot Clara. When he forgot other things, it was usually because he was thinking about her. She looked beautiful when she opened the door on Sunday morning. He told her so, and as he got into the car, they smiled warmly. 2 things, he said once they started driving. Today's coffee hour again. And have you thought about inviting the church? They won't expect anything fancy, she replied. No one associates me with anything fancy anyway. Not really. I've been to receptions in the church parlors. They bring in food from local restaurants. But the wedding service? It will be out of the standard book that Methodist preachers use. They've seen long white trains and flower girls. They've seen ordinary clothes. She was responding to the fancy church wedding model, and that was his fault, not hers. He had never expressed his Aldersgate's really model. You want to be part of the church, don't you? Very much. Well, when Aldersgate members get married to each other, everybody looks on. He was putting that too strongly. Okay, well, it won't be everybody. He needed to correct his statement. The kids don't usually come, and others give it a pass, but it's one thing to be invited and give it a pass, and it's another thing to not be invited. I said okay. Yeah, she had. The reason I asked today is that I'd like to issue the invitation at coffee hour. Why not? And this time, maybe, it would be better if we don't split up. Yeah, I can see that. You were right the first time, though. After the service, they went into coffee hour and sat with Cassandra, Bill, and the boys. When the rattle of plates died down, he spoke to Clara. Get up with me. She did, and he took her left hand. You've all seen this, he said loudly. He showed her hand with the ring. Clara and I are getting married. The wedding is in nearly 2 weeks. Saturday, February 2nd. It's at 3 p.m., and it's in the sanctuary. You're all invited. There was a scattering of applause. Before they sat down, he took Clara around the room, and everybody said nice things. Well, every adult but Claire. She got up and gave Clara a silent hug. They sat down and finished their coffee and cookies. When people started to leave, he led Clara down the hall to the church library. They had a nice kiss with his foot blocking the door. He needn't have bothered, as nobody tried to get in. They went to Maria's pantry for the meal afterwards, and Clara finished her ravioli. It wasn't a huge serving, but it was the only solid food that he'd seen her actually finish. She declined dessert, however, citing the cookies she'd had at the coffee hour. While they were there, he gave her the figures on income, his expenses, and what would be family expenses, rent, car, that sort of thing. She gave him her list of her expenses. She was going to wait in his apartment for the delivery man Monday, and he gave her the money for the tip when they were back in the car. He didn't like to wave money around in a public place. They'll probably set up the bed when they deliver it. If not, leave it. I don't want you doing heavy lifting. Anyway, if they do, give them the 20. If they don't, give them the single. Don't offer them the 20 if they'll put up the bed. Anyway, but there wasn't anything further to say. He started the car and drove her home. They had a sweet kiss outside her door, but she didn't invite him in. Monday, when he got home, the place smelled better than it ever had. Food smells wafted from the kitchen. Clara came towards him. Well, he reached for her. Take your coat off first. That was sensible. She felt much better against him when he wasn't wearing a coat. He hung both the parka and the suit coat in the closet. She was warm and soft, and arousing against him as he explored her mouth with his tongue and her seat with his hands. I gather, he said when he came up for air, that you didn't want to go out for dinner. You said to make myself at home. Well, yes, but he hadn't meant for her to cook for him. On the other hand, this was a delightful foreshadowing of their marriage. I meant for your convenience, but that smells delicious. Did the bed come all right? Yeah, but the sheets didn't. Damn, the sheets hadn't come because he hadn't bought any. And, of course, twin sheets. Top sheets, too, but especially fitted bottom sheets. Didn't work on a double bed. Damn, I should have thought of that. So should I? That didn't follow. She was always blaming herself. Why? You didn't know what I had. Now, she might have been at fault for being so distracting that he couldn't get his act together, but she wasn't at fault for not knowing what sheets he had in his linen supply. Is there a place to buy them before it closes? Now, that was the right question. And, yes, they could get to Sears. Sears would have sheets. Or should he go alone? Yeah. Can you leave the dinner? Easily. Let's go. She was starting to take charge, and that was fortunate. At Sears, she selected several sets of sheets and a blanket. They would need another pillow, too, and they bought that. She got another couple of pillowcases, although his old ones would still work. After a short time kissing, she broke to return to the kitchen. He made the bed with the new sheets and blanket. He put old, but washed, pillowcases on both pillows. Then he went to the kitchen for another kiss. Where's your calendar? Clara wasn't in the mood for kisses. She was too busy being a chef. He pointed to the calendar hanging on the wall. She giggled. No, silly, a colander, to drain the spaghetti. He heard the difference in pronunciation the second time, but he didn't know what she was talking about otherwise. When she figured out that he really didn't know what she meant, she had him pour the water out of the pot in which she had boiled the spaghetti. She held the lid on so that only the water got out. Then she used tongs to remove the spaghetti. When the only noodles left were swimming around, they did it again. The meal was delicious, and he told her so. After eating, they cleared the table and loaded the dishwasher together. Although she didn't have to cook for him, he appreciated the time they spent side by side. It felt comfortable, almost like they were a married couple. Afterwards, they acted like teenagers, laughing, chatting, and enjoying each other's company. He had to take her home, but soon, in 2 weeks, she'd be living there, so those 2 weeks still had to pass. On the way to her family's house, he asked, dates Wednesday and Friday nights? She agreed, her usual quiet acceptance feeling right. Of course they'd go out together. Let's skip the 6 o'clock bit. I'll come right after work, maybe 5:30. Don't put on your coat until I ring the bell. On those nights, he took her to movies after dinner. They sat close, his arm around her, but kept things respectful. At her house, her parents gave them space in the kitchen. Sunday morning, they sat near each other in church, but didn't touch. Claire, sitting in the same pew, mentioned her car trouble. He offered her a ride home. The weather was mild, so Clara and Claire decided to walk with him to the car instead of waiting for a ride. They were among the last to greet Reverend Lawrence as they left. Rehearsal Friday night? Reverend Lawrence asked Clara. He hadn't thought much about wedding rehearsals. Sure. Claire, can you make it? Clara asked. Claire had just shaken the Reverend's hand. Yeah, want me to tell Joan? Could you? I completely forgot about the rehearsal. He wasn't the only one. That's okay. It's your first wedding. It's not mine, not even my 100th, the Reverend joked. Then he turned to him. And you host the rehearsal dinner. Is 7 a.m. good time? Clara didn't object. Okay, we'll call if there's a problem. They headed down the stairs, and he directed Claire toward the car. If Clara's family couldn't come, the dinner would be Friday night, but not at 7 p.m., which was the issue. After dropping Claire off at the graduate residence, he thought about their upcoming schedule. Well, we won't have a date Friday night. Or we'll have a different kind of date. Not the kind he originally imagined. Are Monday and Wednesday all right? He didn't want to assume too much, but a standing date seemed reasonable in the week before the wedding. Sure. They ate at a different Chinese restaurant. Again, they kissed at her door, but she didn't invite him in. She evidently thought that Sundays were different from dates. Back home, he made 3 phone calls. Bill wasn't surprised by Friday night. He suggested the Milano's back room for the rehearsal dinner. They don't take large crowds, but a dozen can eat there without feeling lost. Thanks. He got the answering machine at Mom and Dad's. He tried Rachel. Hello. Stan sounded excited. Stan, it's Uncle Eric. Hi. He was much less excited, now. This wasn't the phone call he wanted. Is your mother there? Sure. Mom, it's Uncle Eric. The last sentence was shouted, but Stan had taken the phone away from his mouth, so it came over the phone at less volume than the first. The rap of the phone being set down, and then a wait. Eric? Rachel, there's been a slight change in plans. She's thrown you over. No, slighter than that. There is a rehearsal the night before. It's at 7 o'clock, and I'd like you to be there. I called Mom and Dad, but I got the answering machine. Anyway, I'd like you to be there, but I could understand if you couldn't. I don't know what you'd have to rehearse, anyway. But that might be my ignorance. I don't know what I'd have to rehearse, either. Well, they'll tell you. Has anyone told you to buy your bride a bouquet? No. Well, not till now. Thanks. You're welcome. I hope she's a good manager. You need someone to manage you, and I'm too far away. That was a dig, but it was too close to the truth for him to try to dig back. I left a message on Dad's machine. I'll call tonight. Talk to them, okay? I'm not the one who doesn't talk to them. Long distance isn't that expensive, you know. I mean about this. Well, you didn't talk to them about this, either. No, I've met a nice girl. Boom. The first news is that you're getting married, and that's in a letter. And I had to learn from them. Well, there was no reason writing duplicate letters to Rachel and Mom. Anything he wrote one would be told the other. So, I'm a bad son, and a bad brother, and, apparently, a bad uncle. Stan used to like to talk to me. That, for once, isn't your fault. From Rachel, this was a great concession. He's going through another phase. I asked about his going, and he's not interested. He's not interested in much, right now, and what he is interested in he's not telling me. That sounded familiar. Some interest you don't share with your parents, especially not your mother. Maybe my birthday gift should be a subscription to Playboy. Don't you dare? You think that's it? Well, he's a little young. He hadn't seen Stan for a couple of years, but it wasn't that long. Stan was still 12, not a teenager yet. He looked a florist up in the yellow pages. They were open Saturdays, not surprising since he'd reached them on Sunday, and he could stop in Friday to select a bouquet, which he could pick up Saturday. That was one thing he didn't have to ask Bill about. Well, Rachel and Bill told him privately. The pastor blurted it out in front of an audience. He now understood polygamy. If you went through this a couple of times, you'd know what you were doing. If Clara's figures were accurate, she would add to his costs less than he would save on parking and cleaning services. Of course, she wasn't counting buying maternity clothes, let alone the costs of a baby. Monday, he was paired with Bob. The judge, Goldberg, had been a prosecutor before Eric's time and was a dream to appear before. The lunch break was generous, and he got to Carson's again and bought a fancy set of towels. They could probably live with the ones he had, but his only match sets were a little worn. Again, he left when court let out, and he got to Clara's house shortly before 5:15. Her mother returned to the kitchen, and he and Clara kissed until her father got home. They went to a movie and then to the faux place again. He could depend on others to remind him of what was needed for the wedding. After that, though, he was going to be starting a marriage, and Clara didn't have any more experience there than he did. Well, she would need cash. Then, too, he was going to leave her the car. Well, the cash he could provide. While he was getting the cash at Northern Trust on his lunch hour, Tuesday, he got the forms for putting her on the account. She would need to be on other accounts, too. He paid most of his bills with credit cards. Well, he'd send for those which weren't local. That night he typed up and signed a paper saying that Candace Clara Wharton Stevens had his permission to drive the car. In the morning, he put it in the glove compartment next to the registration. Wednesday, he didn't leave the office until 5:30. Figuring that anybody in the office might have seen Clara there, he decided that he wouldn't invite any of them to the wedding. When he picked up Clara, she wasn't dressed for anything fancy. He took her to the first Chinese place in Evanston again. While there, he handed her an envelope with the cash and told her they would talk later. You still have your car keys? He asked while they were walking to the car. Yeah. Feel confident about driving tonight? Yeah. She didn't sound confident, but Clara never did. She got in the driver's side, though, and he got in the passenger side. Drive me to the apartment. Do you know the way? He gave her some directions, but she sort of knew Evanston by now. Look, why don't you take the car now? I have papers in the glove compartment saying that you have my permission to drive the car in case you are stopped. The envelope I gave you is some cash. You spent a little for groceries already. This is money for what you think the household needs. Some of it is in singles, because you don't want to go in and buy a head of lettuce with a 20. The tank is nearly full, but you might need gas, too. I'll ride the EL to work the next 2 days, and Bill or Dad will get me to the rehearsal. To the wedding, too. She only acquiesced. Thursday night, though, he saw evidence that she had been there. Pete, the sexton, usually came in Thursday nights after rehearsals. After his dinner, he got in the church while the choir was coming out. He caught Pete there and told him about the wedding, the reception, and the rehearsal. Yeah, Pastor told me. Well, I'm sorry to make extra work for you, but this might help. He handed him 2 20s. Why, thank you. You're quite welcome. He went out and back to the apartment. Friday, he left directly from court. Since he was on the EL, he got home well before 5 o'clock. He showered, shaved again, and dressed in clean clothes except for his shoes. There was a call from Mom on his answering machine. They had started early, Dad and Rachel having taken the day off. He called their motel and told Dad how to find his apartment. They came by at 6:30, and Dad gave him the wheel. He parked close to the church. Reverend Lawrence was there and let them in. Joan was already there, and Clara and her family came minutes later. Bill let Claire in, and they were all assembled. Just what had to be rehearsed, he couldn't tell. Of course, fancier weddings had more to be rehearsed. They went to Milano's for the rehearsal dinner, and there were few enough people that Clara got to know his family. She drove him home, and they had a nice kiss in the car. The next time, they would be in their own home. Saturday morning, he made the bed with all new bedclothes. He had cereal for breakfast. Dad picked him up, and he went to their motel for some family time. Really, Eric, said Rachel. She is a beauty. What does she see in you? Somehow, that's not a question I've asked her. And I'd appreciate your not asking the question either. Isn't she rather young? Mom asked. 19. That is, much as it may surprise you, over the age of consent. Well, yes. But what does she do? What you did at 19, and what Rachel and I did. She goes to school. Actually, Clara had told him that she wasn't going back this semester. The semester had already begun. But Mom didn't have to know that. Really, dear? Everyone was telling him really. Well, you know, yes, she's younger than I am. But, since I'm older than she is, I'm established enough that I can support a family on my earnings alone. Well, Dad said, she's a lovely girl. I'm surprised that she's not pressing for a huge, fancy wedding. Dad, Rachel said. She'd gone all out for her wedding. Dad had been happy enough at the time. If he could change one aspect of that wedding, it would be her choice of groom. I didn't say anything about you. Look, Eric said, she's a different person. We're all, each of us, particular individuals. Some things are important to one person, and some things are important to other persons. I just hope I can provide her with what is important to her. That was truer than he was willing to explain. Yes, Clara needed him to be father of her child. In a year, however, she would need this much less. He had to become what she would need then, and he was determined to find out what that was. They went out for lunch, and his family asked fewer personal questions in public. He got a rundown on Stan. He stopped at the florist for the bouquet and got to the church about 45 minutes before everything was to begin. He got his family seated on the left of the front pew and gave Reverend Lawrence the wedding license. When Clara's family came in, he gave her mother the bouquet and went into the fellowship room, so Clara had freedom to come and go. Bill got him, and they went around so that they came in the back. They stood to one side for a few minutes, and then Dennis played the wedding march, and her father walked Clara down the aisle. She had always looked pretty, but she looked especially beautiful right then. The church, never full on a Sunday, was remarkably less full then. The service went without a hitch. At the end, he kissed his bride. Bill ducked out, grabbing Dan Hagopian. Marge Hagopian and a couple of other women from UMW went through the reception line first. They proceeded to mix the punch. The line was done before Bill and Dan got back from the Thai place. They brought the wedding cake, too. Marge shooed Clara and him to the long table at the back of the parlors. They sat there while Claire and Joan brought them their food. Everybody else got their own. After the meal, they cut the cake, and people lined up for it. There was a table with some wedding presents on it. According to Mom and Mrs. Wharton, they weren't supposed to open them then. They separated and went around giving thanks and getting congratulations. When he thought that the time was ripe, he walked over to Clara and looked a question at her. You want to go? Clara asked. If you want to. Let me thank Claire and Joan and get my purse. They started to leave. Cassandra and I will take care of the presents, Bill said. Oops. Something else he'd forgotten. Thanks. Then Clara led the way to where she'd parked the car. He drove them home. Once upstairs and out of their coats, he leaned in for a gentle kiss and began to take off his jacket. She stopped him. Tonight, she said, let's do it this way. I'll get ready for bed first, and then you can. He agreed, respecting her wishes. When she came out of the bathroom in her elegant robe, he realized she was right. Though they were married, this night felt truly special. Feeling a bit nervous, he decided to shower again and change into the pajamas his mom had given him for Christmas. He shaved once more and applied aftershave lightly. She looked peaceful lying there. He kissed her gently and brushed her hair back, reminding himself to take things slowly. She moved closer in bed, making space for him. He admired her calm presence, and when she helped him settle in, he appreciated the quiet closeness between them. She suggested they both wear pajamas, and he agreed, wanting to make her comfortable and not rush anything. When he stepped out of bed briefly, she smiled warmly and joked that he looked better that way. Their connection grew through soft touches and quiet moments filled with warmth and care. He waited patiently, always respecting her feelings, and they shared whispered words of affection and reassurance. Though he felt eager to be closer, he kept his promise to move slowly. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him, and he rested beside her, feeling safe and cherished. She held him gently as he drifted to sleep. The next morning, she hurried to the bathroom, and he heard her feeling unwell. He knew she was pregnant and understood the morning sickness. When she returned, she asked if he wanted to use the bathroom before his shower. He agreed, and after freshening up, they prepared for the day. Though she avoided his kiss, he kissed her forehead gently. She cooked breakfast but only ate toast. At church, they sat together, still basking in the joy of their wedding. Clara went up for communion with him, which made him happy. After the service, Cassandra arrived with her family, and a casual conversation followed about the people they saw. Who's that? Bill asked before he could greet the boys. Uncle Eric, Paul and Johnny said. And who is the woman standing with Uncle Eric? Miss Wharton, Johnny said. Paul wasn't saying anything. Probably he smelled a rat. She sure looks like Miss Wharton, doesn't she? But really, she's Mrs. Stevens. Bill, Cassandra said, don't obfuscate. She was a wonderful woman with a beautiful alto voice. but occasionally she said something which reminded you that she was a professor. Treading on your monopoly, dear? Bill asked. Very well. He turned to the boys. Yesterday, she married your Uncle Eric. Since he's Mr. Stevens, that makes her Mrs. Stevens. Is that clear? Well, Clara asked, if he's Uncle Eric, can I be Aunt Clara? You want that? Asked Cassandra. Yes, I do. Well, today they got more information and more confusion than is fit for kindergartners. This week is for you guys. Why don't you come visit us a week from Wednesday? We can get the boys using your new name then. Professor Palmer, you are more than kind. Well, if the guys can call you by a new name, can you call me by my name? I'm not your professor anymore. Can you call me Cassandra? Certainly, Cassandra. What time Wednesday? Usually, he went straight from work when he was visiting Cassandra, Bill, and the boys, but Clara and he were a couple now. That answer wouldn't really work. The two women set the time. The group went out the front, shaking the pastor's hand. Reverend Lawrence was always careful to greet the kids, as well as the adults. He and Bill went for the cars while the others waited. Mexican food okay? He asked Clara when she was in the car. Fine, but I'm cooking supper. She prepared a delicious meal. They cleared the table and loaded the dishwasher together. Somehow, doing that made him feel more connected. Sitting close while they watched television felt more like being in love than just living together. He wore his usual pajamas, and she wore her comfortable nightgown to bed. He had promised to always show affection, and while he hadn't been perfect, she seemed content with their quiet moments together. Once in bed, they shared a warm, caring hug before he drifted off to sleep, comforted by her presence beside him. Mornings weren't as difficult as he had expected. She experienced morning sickness, but waited to shower until after he left for the day. Despite that, she cooked breakfast every morning as well as dinner each night. She ate a little more of the dinner she prepared, though not as much as he did. Her avoiding kisses in the morning was understandable. He wouldn't want to kiss her right after she'd been sick either. He made an effort to show affection at other times, and they both enjoyed those moments. Hugging often felt even more meaningful, and she seemed to appreciate it too. He used his lunch breaks to gather forms from stores where he had charge cards, making sure she was added to all of them. He also used office time and a typewriter to send letters to other accounts. Maybe she would want some accounts of her own someday, but he wasn't sure what she might need. He realized he didn't really know what women bought besides clothes and groceries. Their grocery bills were sure to be higher than his had been. If she kept this up, he would be eating more dinners at the apartment in February 80 than in the previous 3 years. However, the increased grocery costs wouldn't affect their overall expenses. The money saved from fewer restaurant meals would more than cover what he'd given her in cash, and she hadn't asked for more yet. On Wednesday, he suddenly realized he hadn't added her to his health insurance. After court, he went to the personnel department and took care of it. They added her immediately, but required a form to issue her a card. The personnel person also had him file a new W-4. By Friday, he felt he had everything sorted. The credit cards from out-of-town companies hadn't arrived yet, but that could take weeks. That night, when they said goodnight, he wanted to give her a hug like the night before, but hesitated, worried it might make her uncomfortable. So he kept his distance as they settled in to sleep. Saturday morning, when she was ready for the day, he gathered all the paperwork. All she needed to do was register her new signature. These are to get your signature on the account and the cards. You might want to practice a few times, he told her. Then he realized, you're going to take the name Stevens, right? I should have asked sooner. Clara found one of her old school notebooks and practiced her signature until she felt confident. When she got to the bank form, he had another thought. Northern Trust is in the loop, which is convenient for me, but maybe you want an account closer to Evanston to feel more connected to your new hometown. You should have that choice. He added, it'll be a while before the new checks arrive. Your signature will be valid by Monday afternoon, but businesses might hesitate to accept the new checks until then. I can make sure you have enough cash to get by until then. Also, opening an account closer to you might be a good idea. Northern Trust works for me downtown, but it might not be best for you. Cash will be fine. Then he should remember to get her more cash. I just don't know what groceries cost, he said. I'm used to doing my budgeting post hoc. I open my credit card bills and see if I went under or over budget the previous month. Well, she said, we're both learning. I'm saving receipts, and I'll add them up to see what the groceries cost. I'm not any more used to being married than you are. That would be fine, and she sounded real understanding of his forgetfulness. Well, between now and when the checks came, he would make sure to give her as much each week as she said the groceries cost. Before she got those figures together, he should get her another $100 on Monday. That's right. They had a little savings set aside. He hadn't added any more money to his mutual fund since he'd first proposed, and he'd withdrawn enough to pay for the ring. Money was sitting in his checking account that would cover all but the most serious emergencies. One more form, and she'd be on his health insurance plan. After finishing that, she went into the kitchen. After dinner, they relaxed in front of the television. This suited him well since he spent 40 hours a week plus travel time away from home. Clara would soon need a break to avoid feeling restless. Luckily, the apartment was new to her, so it shouldn't be a problem just yet. This was as good as it could get for him, and he barely paid attention to the show. She snuggled into his arm, and he smiled, enjoying the quiet comfort of her presence. He knew that at some point during her pregnancy, Clara might need more rest and less activity. He wasn't sure when, but he thought it would be after her belly grew larger. Until then, he wanted to be there for her as much as possible. It had been a week since they'd spent this kind of quiet time together. She showed no signs of discomfort now. His heart felt full, and eventually he went to bed. She followed shortly after, wearing her favorite cozy robe. "Do you really need to wear that robe?" he asked playfully. She didn't answer but removed it, revealing her comfortable nightwear. He admired how peaceful she looked and felt grateful for this time with her. They settled in bed and shared a gentle kiss. It was sweet and reassuring. They enjoyed the closeness and warmth of each other's company. He whispered how much he cared for her before they both drifted into a restful sleep. At church, they were no longer seen as celebrities, but they still had friends to talk to after the service. When Dennis came down after playing the postlude, he approached him. "Look, you seem to do your courting in church, and I could understand that keeping you out of the choir. You're a married man now. Do you think you could sing again? We're really short on tenors, and Maureen will be back soon." Maureen had a lovely soprano voice, but Dennis knew the choir needed more balanced harmony. "I'll think about it." He would really ask Clara, but if he expressed it that way, Dennis would ask her himself. "I don't want to be up there next week." That was a coffee hour, and, although choir members participated, Clara would have to find a table by herself before he came up from the robing room. "Well, try for Thursday. We rehearsed the next 3 anthems." He knew that, but he saw Dennis's point. He needed 3 rehearsals to sing well. 2 would help. If he were to sing an anthem with only 1 rehearsal, he would be ragged. "I'll think about it." And he did think, and, what was more important, consult his wife about singing in the choir. "Chinese place okay?" he asked when they were in the car driving away from church. "Fine, but I cooked supper. Do you want to make that the weekly pattern? I mean Sunday dinner at noon out, Sunday supper at night at home." He thought she should get out more, but he didn't want to look like he was avoiding her cooking. "Okay, well, it is now the weekly pattern. If you see a reason to change it, tell me. And, speaking of which, yeah, I like spending time at home with you, but I get out for 40 or 50 hours a week. Your break from spending time at home with me is spending time at home alone. Well, I go out shopping nearly every day." She did? What did she buy? And what did she buy it with? He'd only given her a little more than $100. Well, that's good. Was it really good? And she would find going up and down the stairs more of a chore in a few months. "If you want to go out shopping, it's good that you do. But I was thinking of us going out together, movies or something. Would you like to?" "Sure. Once a week?" "Sure. I have another question." They started their relationship having all of their discussions in a moving car. They now had a home, but it still felt more appropriate to bring up the questions while they were driving. "Dennis, the organist, suggested I go back to the choir. That would mean our not sitting together. Would you mind?" "No, that's fine. I want to be with you the beginning of the next coffee hour, which is next week, so I won't sing then. But rehearsals are Thursdays. I thought I might start rehearsing this Thursday." "Okay, that would mean that the night we go out together couldn't be Thursday." A long silence. "How about Tuesday?" "Okay." By now, they were in the restaurant parking lot. They saw a movie Tuesday and went to visit Cassandra, Bill, and the boys Wednesday. The boys, who had never been certain of the identity of Miss Wharton, were happy to call her Aunt Clara. Cassandra went back to the kitchen, and Bill wasn't home yet. "Spin me around," said Paul. Cassandra didn't mind that before dinner, but she didn't appreciate it in the living room. "Why don't you invite Aunt Clara and me up to your room? I might spin you around up there." Cassandra was insistent that their playroom was their space and that they controlled admittance, except for their parents and Mrs. Jackson, the cleaning lady. "Okay," said Paul, which wasn't much of an invitation, but it was as good as they were going to get. "What's the magic word?" he asked Paul when they were in the kids' playroom. Both boys were busy clearing debris off the floor. He wasn't going to spin anyone around until the footing was reliable. "Uncle Eric, please swing me around." "You'd rather have that than books?" "Please. Why don't we do it like this? Before supper, I'll swing you around. After supper, Aunt Clara will read some books to you." "Yeah." And Johnny echoed Paul. Clara took Johnny's hand and stood beside the TV set. It was easier to avoid collisions if everything that was in danger of collision was in the same area. He picked up Paul and got him in a tight hug. He spun in 3 full circles, the second one real fast. Paul let go, and he set him down. Johnny ran over for his turn, and Paul went and stood by Clara and let her take his hand. He spun in the opposite direction for Johnny. He'd learned that was the best way to reduce dizziness. The boys had been so good that he repeated the process. He and Clara then went downstairs to emphasize that the game was over. Bill came home while they were on the stairs. The boys ran into him on their way downstairs, but they stopped at his word and grip on Paul. They stayed behind him until Clara was off the stairs. The twins didn't get much upside-down time before Cassandra called everybody to dinner. The kids were used to telling their stories of school at dinner, and he, and apparently Clara, listened with interest. After dinner, Clara helped clear. He sent the boys back upstairs to get some books for Aunt Clara to read to them. Soon after they had brought their books downstairs, Clara and Cassandra got to the living room. He set her up in the middle of the couch with a boy on either side and a couple of books on the other side of each boy. She read to them until Bill called time. Since the alternative was bed, she got a long kiss and hug from each boy. He got the same, and then it was Cassandra's turn. Bill herded them up the stairs. Cassandra sighed as the clatter receded. "So how is married life treating you?" she asked. "It's still full of surprises," Clara answered. "Yeah, just wait until you get to parenthood. I didn't expect that," is the motto of the mamas. Dr. Spock tries to prepare you, but he doesn't have the imagination that either of those two have. Eric tells me that you have some circle to help you. Clara would be interested in parenting advice sooner than Cassandra suspected. They are more help for the younger ones. Not just younger in age, but having younger kids. I had, unfortunately, been a mama for several years when the Priscilla Circle was formed. Reverend Lawrence tried to warn us, but he didn't have questions for everything, he said. And, 2, Clara not only has to get used to being married, but to being married to me. And vice versa, Clara said. Actually, Eric is one of the good things about being married. She didn't sound convincing to him, but Cassandra didn't seem to notice. After the conversation went on for a bit, Bill came downstairs alone. Cassandra immediately headed up for goodnight kisses, and Bill dumped the wedding gifts on a chair next to him. "Thanks. I should have remembered them. You guys are the least mercenary couple I've ever seen," Cassandra said from the stairs. "I had all the packages open the next day." Well, yes, but she had had many more gifts. He could have told his coworkers, and they would have chipped in for a gift or two. Then, however, they would have remembered the date better. Besides, he didn't know who had been around to notice Clara asking for the sex crimes section. It had been better to leave them out of it. They thanked their hosts for the meal and for all the help during the wedding and before. Cassandra and Bill, in turn, thanked them for the entertainment they had provided the twins. "Nice people," he said in the car driving back to the apartment. "Nice people. Nice kids. You enjoy being Aunt Clara? Reading to them?" "Yeah, but I'm never going to spin them around." "Well, they'll probably never ask you. For that matter, they're getting too heavy. I'm not sure how long I can keep that up. I think our first visit as a couple was both a pleasure and a success." He was leading the witness again, but Clara didn't express opinions unless he did. Yeah, her tone, at least, sounded satisfied. And they were, really, a couple. He could introduce her into the society in which he was such an insignificant participant. He figured that Clara would impress more than he ever had. But they were a couple. He'd bask in her reflected glory. Eric Stevens figured out that he'd put himself in a trap. Before he'd married Clara, she had gone to the state's attorney's office to meet Miss Murphy. Everyone in the office she had asked where to find Miss Murphy would know that she was the assault victim. That was the only sort of case Murphy handled. He had thought that not inviting anybody to see his wedding would avoid their making that connection. Now, though, he was married and nobody at the office, except the guy in personnel, whom he didn't know socially and who probably forgot as soon as he filed the papers, knew about it. If they found out, it would raise questions, and he didn't want that. At church, however, everyone knew he was married. They saw him with his young, attractive wife, and he felt it raised his standing. Instead of being just the quiet man, he was the quiet man married to someone admired. Clara, who had worried about how she'd be perceived, wasn't shy about him noticing her presence. One Sunday in March, she came to him, concerned about how her appearance might be changing. "Do you think I'm showing?" "Maybe just barely." Her figure was still slender and graceful. "Soon, it will be obvious even when I'm dressed. I don't know how long I can keep it hidden." "Well, you're a married woman. Do you really need to hide it?" "I can tell people I'm expecting. I just can't say how far along I am." Unfortunately, no one believes it when it's still early. She thought that having this happen before marriage would be a scandal, even now. Cassandra had once joked that the only reason she'd married Bill was that he was such good company. Really, the people you should tell are Cassandra's circle. They can offer advice. There are only so many places in the church where gossip happens. He wished he could say no one in the church gossiped, but that wasn't true, and he didn't want to lie. You have the choir covered, and the college students, though I don't know if they gossip much outside their group. If you cover those circles, you only have to worry about the others. You think I should? She asked. Worry? No. Talk to the circle? I really think you should. You said you wanted a support group. That's a specially designed support group. Now come here. She did. And he kissed the tiny bulge in her stomach, the bulge that was her reason to marry him, the bulge, or rather the baby somewhere under it, which he had promised to treat lovingly because he loved Clara. When Clara told him that there was another circle now, he could have kicked himself. He'd heard at one point, but had forgotten. On the way home from church the next Sunday, she gave him the address, and he drove past the apartment house. Clara knew Evanston now, but not as well as he did. The circle met on Tuesday, which meant that he and Clara missed their movie date that night. But this was more important. She came back happy about the group. This pleased him immensely. He didn't delude himself that she had married him because she was deeply in love with him. She had married him because the alternative was worse, becoming an unwed mother. Right now, she needed him. Clara wasn't some mercenary. She hadn't married him with the expectation of divorcing him as soon as her son had a name. She had said, as long as we both shall live. On the other hand, she had no reason to stick with him for years of unhappiness. So anything which made her happy was in favor of his keeping her. And anything about the church that made her happy was an even better omen for their marriage. He was her attachment to the church. That was what worried him about her picture of everybody gossiping that the baby would come too soon. It wasn't everybody in the world. It was the people of the church who worried her. She pictured them as all talking behind her back. As a matter of fact, damn few of them cared. If you put out a questionnaire, premarital intercourse should be permitted. Favor? Oppose? Probably 2 out of 3 would check oppose. Maybe 9 out of 10 if they had to sign it. On the other hand, fewer than a dozen people, most of them women and most of them past 65, disapproved strongly enough to make judgments about people. He'd be surprised if Claire wasn't sleeping with Kurt. And if Kurt had an affair with another co-ed, Joan would think him horrible, not because he had sex without marriage, but because he had betrayed Claire. On the other hand, plenty of the congregation would gossip. The choir, if he weren't there, would have a field day with stories of somebody having sex on the sly. They wouldn't be shocked, but they would be titillated. Would you mind if I went back to brown hair? Clara asked out of the blue once when they were driving back from church. That would be all right. No, that would be fine. Are you thinking of that? Why did he say fine? That would be wonderful. Nobody in the office who had seen her would recognize her in brown hair. It wasn't as though they had actually met her and been introduced to her that day. Murphy and her tame cop had, but their mouths were sealed, and they didn't socialize with the traffic group much anyway. Yeah, a bottle blonde co-ed is one thing. A bottle blonde mother is something else. Well, when you do, I want a picture of you. He could put a picture of his wife, his beautiful wife, though a tiny photo might not do her justice, on his desk. Then people would get to know that he was married. They might be a little surprised, but they wouldn't be for long. By the time that they saw her, nobody would be reminded of the blonde that they'd seen briefly months before. One Friday, he came home to a brunette. When she changed the color, she had changed her hairstyle a little, too. That was all for the best. She was still as pretty, but she looked a little different. Then, too, the hairstyle would dominate her face more in a picture than it would in life. Did you get that photo? He asked. No. When you get the photos, let me have a couple of small prints. He wanted one for his wallet, too. He thought about asking her if she had enough money for the photography studio, but didn't have any spare cash himself and no way to get it to her before Monday night. Besides, she had both checks and credit cards by then, so she could get cash as easily as he could. I love the way you look, he said when she came to bed that Saturday night. He admired her new hairstyle as much as her overall appearance. He remembered telling her he would be patient if she felt unsure or hesitant, and he tried to be considerate. She had asked him to be attentive, and he did his best to make her feel comfortable and cared for. He noticed how relaxed she became, her breathing steady and calm. He stayed close and supportive, enjoying their quiet moment together. Sorry, he said softly after a while, then moved beside her. The closeness felt intense, more than with anyone else, though something inside him wished for an even deeper connection. He recalled their first night together, how nervous and tender she had been, and treasured that memory. On Tuesday, she gave him 2 snapshots when he got home. They showed different poses, though not drastically different. He put one in his wallet. That night, they went to the movies, and she seemed to enjoy herself. The next day, he took the other picture to court in the breast pocket of his jacket. After court, he bought a frame at a narcotics store to keep the photo on his desk. No one commented, but the office was empty at the time. He got home a bit late, but she greeted him with a kiss instead of asking why. She had made chili that night and ate as much as he did. She always ate healthy portions of her cooking, and he never questioned why she'd eat less when they went out. Thursday was choir night, and she was already in bed when he came home. He tried to be quiet, but she was awake. He got into bed in his pajamas and kissed her. Okay, she said. I give up. Why did you want 2 photos of me? Well, he replied, one's for my wallet. I want to show people what a beautiful wife I have. And the other? I put it in a frame on my desk at work. He didn't want to explain more. It was something many married guys did. She seemed satisfied, and he fell asleep. Clara was getting large now and wearing maternity clothes. He had promised her, even before they were married, that he wouldn't impose sex on her if she didn't want it. He was certain that the time was coming when her pregnancy would lead her to refuse him, and he was determined that he would accept that in good grace. Still, he worried that he would hurt her, worried that she was causing herself pain or fright rather than tell him. Are you sure this isn't going to hurt him? He asked her one Saturday when she was getting into bed. It would be better if she answered his question than if she had to bring up a refusal. And it would be better to stop when the sex act looked like it was far in the future than for her to say no when he was all revved up. Well, she said, there's another way. Look, I'm not rejecting you if I turn away, okay? When I'm ready to let you in, I'll show you the way. That felt much better than outright refusal. He had never tried that approach before, but he had thought about it a lot. What happened to her desire that he always take the lead first? When I'm ready, when you've made me ready. That sounded reasonable. She lay back, and he focused on making her comfortable. He kissed her gently, trying to share his feelings. She relaxed, her breathing becoming softer. Just when he thought he was about to reach her, she pulled away suddenly. It felt like rejection. Stay there. I'll come back to you. That didn't feel like rejection. Then, she moved closer to him. He adjusted to her, trying to be patient. Though things felt different than before, there was no complaint. He felt more connected to her than ever. She guided his hand to where she wanted to be touched. When he reached the right spot, she relaxed her position, giving him just enough space. Can you move your finger when my leg's like this? She asked. Sure. He thought she was ready, but she took a moment to respond to his touch. Unable to provide other comforts right then, he focused on the connection between them. When she did respond, she welcomed his touch quietly, moving gently rather than tensely. He couldn't help but move with her. Neither of them was pushing hard. Their bodies rested comfortably. Oh, she said suddenly. She responded with warmth and movement. Oh, Clara. He felt the closeness between them deeply. It was emotionally stirring, a tender connection that went beyond words. He held her gently and fully. Then, feeling a surge of emotion, he gave himself to the moment. When he finally relaxed, he felt no worries. He was careful not to disturb the baby or her. Later, she moved his hand to rest softly on her chest. That was even better. Oh, Clara, I love you. He loved her constantly, but especially then. He was physically calm, but emotionally fulfilled. She had reached out to him, welcomed his touch on her, made him feel truly accepted. I love you too. That was almost the first time she'd said it. She had made promises at their wedding, but he hadn't heard her say it like this before. He would remember this moment. Can you get the covers? She asked, a practical request after such intimacy. He gently covered them both and tucked the blanket around her and the baby. He lay back. As he settled down to sleep, his last thought was the memory of her heartfelt declaration of love. Eric Stevens loved his wife Clara, and he was determined that he would love her son, too. He had never expected that he'd ever have a relationship with someone as beautiful as Clara, let alone marry someone like that. He was quite clear that she wouldn't have married him if she weren't pregnant and desperate. Well, he'd be a good husband and a good father. That was what she would need. They would need a larger apartment, and he found them one. It was on the first floor, which meant a half-floor walk up from the entry, but the stairs were on the inside. There were only 2 steps up from the street to the outside door. He was afraid of her slipping on the outside stairs when the weather turned cold, and she didn't seem to be aware of that danger. Clara approved of his choice, and, as far as he could see, approved sincerely. After Clara went for an ultrasound, he changed his determination to being a good parent to Clara's daughter. His closest observations of parents were of the Palmers, and they had twin sons. The twins were, even at their young age, explicitly male. Bill held them upside down and taught them to play ball games. So, his picture of being a good parent to a girl was a little vague. Did fathers teach girls to toss a football? Still, he'd do what was needed, and he hoped that Clara, despite her diffidence, would tell him what she wanted. That, after all, was what mattered. Bill argued with his wife, Cassandra, about child-raising methods, and about almost everything else. That was not something Eric was going to do. In the second place, Clara was so diffident and apologetic she wouldn't argue. Cassandra, on the other hand, enjoyed an argument. In the first place, he didn't know what he would do if Clara left him. Realistically, she needed a husband when she was going to bear a child. She would need one much less as time went on. Being a divorced woman with a child was far less of an embarrassment than being a never-married woman with a child was. So, he figured, his best chance was to be the person she needed when she needed the title less. and Clara had the circle from UMW to give her advice. They were the new mothers in the church. They all knew what the latest advice was. He wasn't terribly sure that the up-to-date advice of 1980 was better than the advice of 1950 had been. He thought he had turned out all right. On the other hand, he knew, as a lawyer, what messes people made for themselves when they ignored legal advice. He figured that ignoring other expert advice was likely to have disastrous consequences. Clara also talked with Dr. Gable. He advised her to cut down on alcohol. Eric could see the sense of that, and he stopped drinking at home to keep her company. He was now taking the CTA to work and leaving the car for Clara. That should have made him perfectly comfortable about stopping for a drink with his colleagues after work. Considering that his job was prosecuting traffic offenses which would have made a DUI a total embarrassment, he had been careful about drinking and driving. He found, though, that he tended to hurry home to Clara instead of socializing in bars, or even the office. They had decided that they would treat the baby as theirs, his as much as hers, and he'd be useful in raising her. They went shopping together for baby stuff. He figured that she had the eyes for choosing things, and he had the arms for carrying them. Despite that, Clara hauled things around much more than he considered safe for a pregnant woman. She kept the new apartment immaculate, and all he did was help with the dinner dishes. One of the women in the circle gave her a bassinet. The Stevens could have bought their own, but he was grateful. The gift symbolized Clara's acceptance into the group, something she deeply wanted. Clara had worries about church people discovering her past pregnancy before the wedding and fearing rejection. Most only whispered quietly, and the judgment never reached Clara or him. He remained attentive and caring throughout her pregnancy, always checking in to make sure she was comfortable. They shared quiet, tender moments together, growing closer as the weeks passed. He gently supported her as her belly grew, feeling grateful for the new life they were nurturing. One evening, he felt the baby move beneath his hand, filling them both with joy and hope. Their bond stayed strong, tender, and loving through every change. The next morning, she prepared breakfast and kissed him goodbye with warmth and affection, showing how much their connection had deepened. They asked the Palmers to be godparents. Cassandra happily agreed, and Bill was thrilled. Cassandra joked about Bill's enthusiasm for caring for infants, but promised not to take the baby home with him. "I always return kids to their parents. That's how they learn to trust me," Bill said with a grin. Cassandra laughed, recalling Bill's playful teasing of Nancy Hashimoto while holding Alice. Clara looked a little confused, but the twins listened closely. On the way home, she asked what had been going on. Years ago, he said, before they were married. Cassandra was a grad student new in the church, Bill was infatuated with her, and Alice Hashimoto was a toddler. Alice was a great favorite of Bill's, and vice versa. Anyway, she was running around, and Bill caught her. Nancy came over to get her. Bill said, "Finders keepers, losers weepers." Everybody else within earshot, including Alice, knew Bill was simply being silly. Cassandra bawled him out. "I don't remember what Nancy's advice was. Probably to be nicer to Bill." Anyway, Bill was clearly wearing his heart on his sleeve, but that was the first time that I knew Cassandra cared about him at all, though she was in the choir, and I barely knew him. "You know, I like them, Cassandra especially, but Bill and the kids, too. I don't want to see them break up." Clara's worries were misplaced. Well, if you think the level of argument presages a split, you didn't see them before they were married. They had 2 shouting matches in front of half the congregation. That doesn't even count the one I mentioned. I was really surprised when they got engaged, but they don't seem to fight as much now. Still, I'd be hurt if you started a sentence with "for all Eric's faults as a husband." Maybe, when you want to discuss my faults as a husband, you'll discuss them with me rather than with casual acquaintances while our child is within hearing distance. Eric, when I find one, you'll be the first to hear. Which was sweet of Clara to say. Soon she reported that the baby was kicking. He pulled over to a stopping place. She took his hand and moved it under her coat until he could find the place. He held both of them until the baby was satisfied, or, at least, until it stopped expressing its dissatisfaction by kicking. Clara settled on the name Patricia. She was due August 5th. Wednesday, July 30th. However, he got back to the office to find a message that Clara had taken a taxi to the hospital. He went there immediately, leaving word as he went out that he wouldn't be in the next day. He got there in time to speak to Clara before she was put under anesthesia. He was with her in the delivery room and saw Patty before going to the recovery room to wait with Clara. "MMPH, she finally said, what?" "I saw Patricia. She's fine, perfect. They said you'll want this." He held a cup with ice water and a straw. She sipped. "Thanks. How's?" "Patty is fine. I saw her briefly, and the nurses reported that she is okay." She hadn't looked okay. She had been wrinkled, red, and crying loudly. Still, that wasn't what Clara needed to hear just then. They took Clara to her room and soon forced him out. He stopped by the nursery briefly afterwards, and Patty looked much healthier then. He had wondered if Dr. Gable would object to putting his name down as father on the birth certificate. The doctor knew the facts of the assault, and his office had been the confirmation that this had resulted in the pregnancy. In the event, he didn't blink. Maybe he had forgotten. Eric had the idea that newborns and new mothers stayed in the hospital for a week or more. Clara, however, was sent home the next day. In between times, he'd bought a Polaroid camera. He brought several snapshots to church on Sunday and showed them around the choir room. He'd missed rehearsal, but nobody brought that up. Show Bill afterwards, Cassandra said. I've forbidden him to visit you this early, but he needs something to keep him satisfied. By the way, Dennis, she continued, I'll be godmother, so I, as well as Eric, will miss choir the day she's baptized. And we'll need to sing her the lullaby that day, Maureen said. Dennis, should we run through it beforehand? Some years before, the choir had started singing Lullaby and Good Night to the babies born to the women of the choir after the church service when they were baptized. Why? Asked Phyllis. Eric's wife isn't in the choir. Phyllis was one of the old hens Eric suspected of clucking where he couldn't hear them. It was true that the only male choir member who had become a father during that period was Bruce, and his wife, Karen, was also a member of the choir. He wondered momentarily if she would have raised that objection if he and Clara had been married for more than 9 months when the baby was born. Well, Phyllis, Maureen said, you don't have to sing with us. I do think, Eric, that you should follow Bruce's precedent. We're thin on males. Bruce had sung with the choir after his son was baptized. Eric could see that the choir was going to follow Maureen's lead. If every member of the choir was equal, some were more equal than others. The strongest soprano was definitely more equal than a woman whose voice had been getting thinner for as long as Eric had been in the choir. Well, Eric said, a lawyer is always happy following precedent. Right then, he'd have been happy to follow almost any suggestion that Maureen gave him. After showing Bill, and, inevitably, the twins, the pictures after service, Eric went home to Clara. He told her that the choir was going to sing a lullaby to Patty after the baptism. Patricia had left the middle syllables of her name in the hospital. Is this new? Clara asked. I don't remember that at Beatrice's baptism or at Steve's. The choir only does it for kids of choir members. That's nice of them. Do you want to change her? I changed her before her bottle, but she pooped again. So he took Patty and changed her. Clara went to finish Sunday dinner preparation. She usually hung around, no longer quite supervising, but keeping a wary eye on what he was doing. Now, she seemed to trust him to do the job right. Patty seemed to trust him, too. She looked wide awake, and he took her in his arms when the diaper was on again. He started to pace, swaying his body in time to his steps. That must have been what Patty had wanted. When she looked into his face, he forgot that this was a child for whom he was caring only because he loved her mother. Patty looked adorable. He reached over a finger in front of her hand. She smiled up at him in complete trust and closed her hand. An observer would have thought that she was clutching his finger. It felt like she was grasping his heart. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.